Greetings, salutations, and top of the morning to you, laddie. Today, I want to tackle some really big, challenging topics in the collective. And so as you can probably tell by the title of this video, that is the subject. However, before I get started, I have to make a comment that today, I feel like I don't look super great. My parents came over in the last week, and I ended up having a lot more wine than I normally do. And so I feel a little dehydrated and kind of like underslept. And I feel like I've got these bags under my eyes. So I'm just calling that out in advance. But I feel great in recovery and having lots of water. Cheers. Jordan, you absolutely should not be so hard on yourself, man. You look fine. Yeah, but I look like a wrinkly potato. You could go with shriveled raisin, 'cause you're so sweet. Oh, shucks. Anyway, now let's talk about some real serious thingamabobs. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I've found myself curiously interested in a series by Jubilee here on YouTube called Surrounded, where they take 20 of some kind of people having like a debate, like a roundtable debate with someone else. So one really interesting one was 20 atheists versus Jordan Peterson. And then there was that Congresswoman versus 20 feminists, which was also very interesting. And then I stumbled on one by Charlie What's-His-Face versus 20 something or others. I should probably look this up for reference. Charlie Kirk versus 25 liberal college students. And like, can they outsmart him? Dun dun dun. So this is very interesting to me because I was just checking it out and listening, and the first claim in the first debate that goes for like 20 minutes is abortion is murder and should be illegal. This video was very fascinating, and just as an example, let me share with you a quick clip.
The thing that you're aiming for is less abortion, right? Well, or at least no abortion.
Eventually, it's also a protection of those that can't protect themselves. But yes, and that's why after the reversal of Roe versus Wade, we saw abortions go down dramatically in Texas, Alabama, Mississippi.
I don't think a lot of that is true.
Well, it is, but
it's not true, because when you make abortion illegal, it doesn't actually decrease the amount of abortions that happen.
That's a nice talking point. In Texas, the numbers show differently. The birth rate has gone up.
Yeah, legal goes down, but illegal abortions still happen. Abortions still happen outside of whatever data you're showing.
That's not true, but let's just say.
And another clip.
Do you think it would be a good thing if we had less abortions in America?
It depends on the context. Like, are the abortions prior to sentience?
Yes,
because I think
all abortions.
No, it would not be necessarily
are
better
you against
unless it is the
abortion?
case of the people didn't want the abortions and it would be negatively impactful to their health, medically speaking.
Are you against late-term abortion?
After sentience, yes.
Okay, so you believe in an 8-week abortion ban?
Yeah. No, I don't. Sorry, I believe in an abortion ban after 18 through 26 weeks.
Okay, that's a more reasonable position. I have to give you credit for that.
And then, of course, there's always this one.
No, I'm speaking. 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 No, I'm speaking.
Want to say one more time?
No, I'm speaking.
Got it.
Thank you.
Powerful. This is fascinating, a big conversation, very sensitive, and there's a lot of heated debate and opinions on both sides. I've heard some conversations and stuff like this before, and I've tuned in and what people are saying on both sides of the field, and over, it feels like a very kind of tribal mentality. This like, there's no common understanding, there's no middle ground, it's us versus them, I'm right and you're wrong, and your side should be destroyed. Thank you very much. Now change your mind because I'm the right one. You know, there's this bigger question that as I've been watching and listening and thinking about this over the years, I keep coming to, I feel like there's some missing information that actually could provide a harmonious understanding. One way of considering this from a very spirit science perspective is through the Kabbalistic tree of life. You've got these two spheres on either side that are didactically opposite of each other. I hope I'm using that word right.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Didactic, whatever. And yet, from the merging and fusion of those two, it's not that they cancel each other out, but a new thing is made. In the same way that when a man and a woman love each other very much, they can create a new baby. And it's very interesting that then that is the example that I'm using, because this is a conversation about not having that baby and if it's morally wrong. And I want to start also by saying, like, there's a warning in here that I am going to cover all of the bases, at least as I see it, in this particular video. So there might be times where I say something that you heavily disagree with, and there might be times where I say something that you agree with fully, because I'm going to point out what I believe is how both sides are right and where both sides are wrong or are missing information, so that we can actually potentially find a middle ground that creates something new and creates a higher understanding for everybody. And that's my goal in life. So yeah, the missing information that then continues to unravel as I explore this more has to do with the question of what is a soul? Because there's a question of like, well, if you are aborting a baby, the moment that it's conceived or any time after, you are ending a life and it's murder. Actually, it even goes further than that. Like Charlie has this one shot. He references the etymology of the word fetus.
What does fetus mean?
A fetus is in utero.
What does fetus mean in Latin?
What the f? I'm sorry, is this
It
a
means
language class?
little human being.
Ooh, his smile is very creepy. Okay.
Smiling is creepy.
No, your smile specifically.
Got it.
But
Thank you.
let's go back.
A fetus, I think by a modern definition, is the living baby in the womb as it's growing up, potentially from the point of conception. And so then the question is, when or where in that process, or from the very beginning, do you consider that embryo to be its own sovereign being? And this is why I asked the question, what is a soul? Because you could consider that early body is a living thing and its own sovereign being from the moment it's a single-celled organism. At the same time, you could argue that it's a body being developed for a soul to inhabit, but the soul is not yet in there. Now, of course, we have to look at this from a dimensional perspective, being that there is a physical plane, an astral plane, a causal plane, and then beyond that, we get into the realm of the Tao, the limitless light, the infinite and boundless, the vacuum of spirit. In traditional Kabbalah, that's called the Ein Sof Or, the Ein Sof, and the Ein, which, if you're familiar with Patch Tarot, you might recall our God cards, the Holy Arcana, which are attributed to those. But again, I don't want to get too far into that conversation right now. I also know that I wrap in and weave together a lot of different spiritual teachings. So I'm going to relate to the Kabbalah, and again, the causal up to Ein is relative to the Tao. And there's a lot of other traditions that we could look at, but I also want to keep things simple because we have a bit of a focus here. I value your time very much. I don't want to use it and take it unnecessarily, like that very bit that I just did. So then we really have to define from a spiritual and metaphysical perspective, as well as a scientific perspective, what is a soul and what is a body, and where in the body is the soul. Now, many watching might be familiar with, there are so many ancient mystic traditions say that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. It's also interesting that the Vatican has so many statues of pineal glands, or at least one. I thought they were all over the place. Now, other people believe that the heart is where the soul is. And this is what's very interesting. When you study prana, the 5 types of prana in the body, what we receive and what we find is that prana comes in from the higher self through the top of the head and the back of the head, through the medulla oblongata. It comes into the body and then it divides into 4 other types. So there's prana, this is life force energy coming into the body. And then you also have udana, which is an upwards force that drives you into evolution. Vyana, which is a force of, it actually is centered in the heart and it works outward and it powers the body and gives you the animating energy that allows your body to move. Then we have samana, which is in the belly, and that is the transmutative force. It's the force of digestion, but not just of food. It also digests thoughts and conversations and feelings and experiences. So any processing, like when you say, yeah, I'm processing something right now, that is samana at work. And then the final one is, I believe, apana. Yeah, apana is the force of both, interestingly, excretion, the releasing of things from the body and toxins, and not just, through the bottom, but also through sweat. And it also has to do, interestingly, with sexual energy. It has to do with reproduction. So all of that energy is married to or paired with or a part of Apana. So Apana is interesting because it actually goes in two directions at once. It releases out and it creates, I guess maybe forward might be the better way to describing it. Not up, but it's forward and out or reproductive in the creation of new life. If we consider all of these things, we might see maybe the pineal gland is actually the seat of the soul, but the heart is the center of the human body of consciousness, which is where the Vijnana is, and it's like the center point of our energy. This is why we know that when our breathing is slow and our heart is calm, our mind is clear. But there's this connection here between the left brain and the right brain and the pineal gland and the heart. And isn't it interesting, a bit of a tangent, but a very relevant one, isn't it interesting that if we look at the traditional symbol of Christ on the cross, where's he hanging? Where's his head? Like this thing that I just described makes a cross, right? Like left brain, right brain, pineal gland, and the cerebrospinal tube, or the chakra column, or whatever you want to call it, the Kundalini serpent that runs up and down the body. So that actually makes a cross image. And when Yeshua hangs on the cross, that's where the center point is. So there might be something there. So that kind of gets me thinking, like, again, if we're saying that it's murder to kill a baby pre-birth, that's murder, sure. But could it be that the soul is not actually in that body until the pineal gland is formed? And again, I'm not coming at this perspective trying to argue like pro-choice. That's clearly the way. Because there's many dilemmas in here, and there's many ways where a pro-life stance is very appropriate and proper. But also, like, there's so much nuance in this. And this is why I felt so compelled to talk about it, because it's not just so clear cut. You know, and again, it depends on what you believe. If you believe that the heart is where the soul is and that's that, then, that's an interesting question. Okay, I'm gonna have to pin that because I want to finish this thought, but I got something that just came to me that's like, But if you believe that the heart is the soul, period, the physical heart is the soul, and maybe there's no energy body or something like that, then from the moment of conception, yes, that soul is in the body, period. Because the heart is the first organ to form the moment that you are conceived. Like, you might remember this from our Spirit Science episode 16 called The Power of the Heart. We show how when the seed meets the egg, it actually starts dividing into sacred geometry. It literally makes a seed of life. It's really cool. And from that seed of life, it forms a bit of an organ. The first clump of cells forms an organ that is a toroidal field. Wild, right? And that toroidal field becomes the heart, and everything else grows out of that. That's amazing. But it also kind of makes sense to me that that again is a living vessel, but it's the soul energy that's in it is only the soul energy of the father and the mother. Now, many traditions, especially I remember first learning about this from the ayahuasca traditions down in Costa Rica when I went to Rhythmia. There was a class that Jerry had, and he described beautifully. He's like, in the Colombian tradition, when you undertake an ayahuasca ceremony, there's actually 3 lines of DNA that you're healing, or 3 lines of energy that you're healing. One is the father's lineage. The second is the mother's lineage. But the third is actually your past life karma lineage from lifetime to lifetime, which is unique unto itself and does not have anything to do, necessarily, with the DNA of the mother and father. Now, because we live in this beautiful multidimensional paradise that is also kind of chaotic and crazy and violent and all of that. Paradise, maybe not the right word to use, but because we live in this reality, it could be also very possible that there are, families that incarnate together. I've actually heard that. I've seen testimonials of that, where it's like, in one lifetime, 2 souls are husband and wife. And in the next lifetime, they're a mother and a daughter. And in the next lifetime, they're a brother and a sister. And they continue to incarnate together. So that makes it very interesting. Like they're They're kind of like coming back over and over, working on the same DNA threads, but they also still have their astral, like, higher self energy and their past life karma that they're weaving through the whole thing. And that's really cool to consider. But with that said, if that's the case, then interesting, what is a human? Because the mother and the father's energy coming together, forming a new vehicle, a new body, a new temple of life. Is it murder if it is only ensouled by the DNA and the energy, the soul energy of the mother and father, but if the higher self, the astral body, the soul, is not yet in that temple, in that body? It's very, very interesting. Again, I'm not trying to claim one way or another, but these are the thoughts that come to me as I think about it. If we are going with the idea that the soul comes in with the formation of the pineal gland, then we have to say, where exactly or when exactly in the development does the pineal gland get formed? Fortunately, this is an easy question to answer because I asked my little robot friend to tell me. And he had some very curious things to say. He described that it's actually this long process that takes a very, very long time. So the initial formation is around week 6 to 7 of gestation. However, that's just when it's detectable. That's when the early cells. Further development happens around the second trimester, around month 4. By then, the gland has its basic structure. So it could also be that the moment of conception, the higher soul or the astral being or whatever, however that soul is coming into the body, maybe it actually does become linked. But it doesn't necessarily, like it's a long, slow process of 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 4 months that slowly it comes into the body over that gestation period. So this brings up a really, really pivotal and kind of amazing but difficult conversation, which has to do with healing. And it has to do with what does it do to the body and the soul if you have an abortion? So I think this is where the pro-life people who are watching might actually really appreciate this. And this actually comes with a story. You see, many years ago, I animated a short section of a documentary that a friend of mine put together called Psyched Out. I believe this documentary is on YouTube. It's all about psychedelics. It's very fun. It kind of went hand in hand with our ayahuasca movie that we made.
I also didn't have my menstruation cycle for 20 years. And they said to me, like, you're perimenopausal, like it's not coming back. Don't worry about it, kind of a thing. Working with a shaman, and he said to me after a ceremony, he said, Lisa, you have 3 spirits in your womb and you have to release them. And I said, 3 spirits? He said, did you ever have any abortions? And I said, yes, I had 2. And he said, no, I think you had 3. And I'm like, okay, Dave, I had 2. But anyways, he said, I need you over these next few ceremonies to really pray on it and like every day meditate and tell them why you couldn't parent them and why you had to do what you did and the place that you were in when you did it, and try and like let them be at peace and go. He said, I think after they leave, your period could come back. And I was just looking at him. I had just started ayahuasca and started working with the shaman, and I was like, okay. And then I'm just hearing my addiction specialist voice, like, Lisa, just trust, just trust, just trust, just trust. And I'm like, okay. So I worked on this over a 2-week period. I did about 10 ceremonies. I'd done 9 ceremonies. I was leaving the next morning from Mexico on a 7:30 a.m. water taxi. And he came to me and he said, Lisa, we've worked really hard. He said, we need to do 1 more ceremony tonight. I'm going to have a private ceremony for you. There's still 1 release that has to happen. I was like, I can't do it. I can't. I got to go back to my life tomorrow, and there's absolutely no way. Well, I ended up trusting and doing this last ceremony. And after the ceremony, he said, okay, our work is done. And I was flying home on the plane. And after 20 years of no cycle, I went to the washroom and I had my period. And I've had it ever since. So I came home and I told my mom the story. And I told her the story exactly. And I said, but I only had 2 abortions. She said, no, Lisa, you don't remember at the very end. You had 3. Talk about trust.
So this is crazy. This brings me to think like, okay, in a world where we exist right now, where some people are permitted and allowed to get abortions and some people are not, and okay, I don't want to get into that yet, but in this world where some people can and do get abortions, there should be proper education and information about how to create natural healing. Because the way that I think about it is, if you are in, or a woman is in a position where it actually feels right to them to get an abortion, they should also prepare not just physically, but spiritually. They should talk to that baby soul, wherever it is. Maybe he's like, I'm coming in. Or she's like, I'm already in here. And something goes terribly wrong. Or something in life changes. Like, I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to, gosh, I don't need to keep defending that, but like, I'm just so nervous that no matter which side I take, someone's gonna get rattled. And I'm like, no, just watch the whole thing, I swear. But okay, so it's like, if someone's gonna get an abortion anyways, can they prepare spiritually? Connect with that soul through meditation, through breath work, through proper plant medicine ceremony. This is really important. Like, you can't just be like, I'm gonna heal that trauma and take a bunch of mushrooms and then go to like a party or something like that. It's, there has to be like, Rhythmia is amazing and they set the example, but there's so many places like that. But the thing is, it's like so dedicated and intentional and purposeful and traditional and modern at the same time, which is cool. It's really, really sacred. It honors the sacred, and that's why that level of healing can take place there. So you potentially could do it on your own, but you really have to know what you're doing and how to guide yourself through it. And at the same time, honestly, from what I've seen at Rhythmia, oftentimes for those really deep things, you need a shaman or a bunch of helpers and a shaman to help guide you through it and support you when you're purging or you're releasing things or you're crying, to have someone there with you or whatever. Like, it's huge. It's really, really big. But that's really good also at the same time. I feel like that would be a conversation that the pro-life argument could actually, or the people on that side could get behind. Because, listen, it's happening anyways, For talking to the people on the right-wing side or the conservative side who say it's pro-life and nobody should ever get abortions, listen, it's happening anyways. Could it be then that even if it happens, even if you deem it as a mistake, that there's a way to heal it and correct it and learn lessons from it? And now here's a conversation. I want to also ask a question to the people on the right side. And I'm going to do this for both. So, again, no sides, just something new. But the question is this: could it be possible that a young woman who at the age of 16 is abused and gets pregnant, not because she wanted to, she didn't have a choice, and she's not in a position to raise a child, that child may end up in a broken orphanage, or her life, all of her dreams and her future plans and potentials that she was dreaming of all get kind of taken away because now she has to raise a child and scrape by and ends meet. And in order to raise this child in an environment that isn't really all that great, could it be that actually not getting abortion in that situation could ruin 2 lives instead of just ending one potential life? And I know that's a hard question to ask, but I want to ask it because it's a valid point. And then there's another side of it too, which is if someone is born from such a evil thing happening. Now, from what I understand, YouTube blocks or takes action if you have certain words. Like I have to say unalive instead of, D-I-E, which is so ridiculous. And the word that starts with R and rhymes with grape is an absolutely abomination upon this planet, and it should never happen. And just think though, if that child, or if there's a child conceived from such a circumstance, then how does that energy affect the child? I have to be honest, I'm an interesting example, I suppose. There's not many like me in the world in terms of how I was conceived. And many of you know this, I'll keep it brief, but I I was conceived by my biological mother and father, and then my father wanted me aborted. And my mother said, no, there's a special something about this guy, and he's coming through. And my father was so upset about that and did not want to have me. And I think maybe there was some self-worth in there. He didn't think he was good enough, and he maybe didn't have the best childhood growing up either. And so he ended up taking his own life. And it was only 28 years later in an ayahuasca ceremony that I went and I healed. I connected with his soul. I found him trapped like in a void in space or between dimensions, feeling so upset that he had done that thing. Now, he and I worked it out. We healed it. It's great. But I also learned in a lot of those ayahuasca ceremonies how so much of the trauma of losing him at the age of 1 month into conception affected the cells in my body before my soul was even in the body. That there was a trauma rooted in my basic biology, locked in my subconscious, that I didn't heal, or that I didn't know about for 28 years of my life. And I realized that that's where so much of like growing up, I often had a very low self-esteem. I was bullied a lot. You know, like my safe place was in the computer, at home, or at lunch hour and school, you know, junior high and stuff, making cartoons. That was where I thrived. And I did have some friends, but I also, you know, I don't know, I was I felt like I was one of the center points of bullying. And so it was very easy for me to fall into patterns of lack of self-worth. And yet at the same time, I'm realizing that like part of the subconscious energy that was rooted in my body might have actually been attracting that and feeding off of it when I received it. So it just made me think worse of myself. And this is why, I mean, it's crazy, but like even when I started spirit science and years later, people would be like, oh my God, spirit science has changed my life. I love it. And I'd be like, well, that's great. But I'm nothing, you know, I'm just a worthless piece of junk. And then someone would be like, you're a pseudoscientist cult leader and I hate you and you should die. And I'd be like, I'm the worst. Interestingly, being a product of both pro-choice life, like this is another side thing. Included in pro-choice is the choice to have the baby. So even when people say like, well, abortion shouldn't happen, it should be pro-life only, but like the ones who are making the choice, it's not like 100% of them are choosing not to have the baby. They can still do it. And a lot of people have conceived without ever intending to. And it's like, whoops, that's a lot of a different energy than, you know, the abusive one. And then they still decide to go forward with it, and it brings their life together. In fact, one of my best friends has that situation himself, and he's such a beautiful soul. And I'm really happy for him and the life that he's having. And he's thrilled that it went that way. But to bring it back to what we were just talking about before this fun little tangent, the question actually then becomes, if a child is born of such an abusive situation and they grow up and they have that energy inside of them, what kind of effect is that going to have on them? And how is that going to ripple out into the world? Now, that can be positive and negative. Again, someone can still be born of that abuse and still receive infinite love from their mother and maybe their stepfather or something later on. And that can be a beautiful thing, but that's a situation by situation of the decision in the moment from the parents or the mother and the father and the whole thing, you know, and maybe family members and maybe friends. Like, the thing is just there's a lot of nuance in this conversation. I know I've said that before, but there really is. And I don't feel like looking at it from such a, it has to be one way or it has to be another way is the highest path. I think we have to, like the seed and the egg, put those things together, take in the higher self information, add it to the plate. What is the soul? What is an astral body? How does it all work? And put that together into some sort of system or way of thinking that transcends all of the limits of each of them individually. Interestingly, in that Charlie versus the liberals conversation, he actually gave one circumstance where he said an abortion is okay. It's if the mother's life is in jeopardy and she's going to die, no matter what, if she has this baby. He says, then then you should abort it because then the mother's life is at risk, which is interesting. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. Again, this is something for our collective mind and collective consciousness to talk about. Hey, so I'm just editing this and I realized there was something that was missing. Remember earlier when I said, okay, I'm gonna have to pin that because I wanna finish this thought, but I got something that just came to me that's like, So really quick, here's that idea. I was thinking about the stories about heart transplants, and then I was thinking about brain transplants. What would happen in the future when we were able to, let's say with technology, like super advanced tech and stuff, able to do like a full brain transplant, or if you were to like take off someone's head entirely, but like keep them alive, you know, like have one of those like Futurama, like heads in a jars kind of thing.
Computers may be twice as fast as they were in 1973, but your average voter is as drunk and stupid as ever.
Does that include the soul? Like, there's some very interesting things. There are stories of people who were on the brink of death. Their heart was damaged for whatever reason, and they actually got a heart transplant, and someone else's heart was put in their body. Now, they were still themselves, but they also received some of the traits of the person that they received the heart from. I remember one story in particular where a woman, I believe, received the heart of a man who had just passed away, and he gave his heart in that process. Her life was saved, but in addition, she instantly received or got this craving for, I think it was some kind of junk food. It was like McDonald's burgers and fries or something like that. And she ended up talking to the mother, I believe, of this person who had passed away. And they confirmed, like, oh yeah, he loved that. That was like his favorite food. And she like received that attribute from him. However, she still had all of her personality and her memories and her history and all of that. She didn't have much more than like, I guess, the muscle memory or some deep heart imprints that had been passed on from this deceased person. Now, it's interesting to note that the heart does have its own neural network to a degree. It's a very simple, very small collection of cells within it or throughout it that does retain memory of some kind. And so there might be something there of saying, yeah, like there is some soul energy or some soul consciousness attached to the heart. But at the same time, with the brain and the pineal gland and the, you know, everything that is stored there and all of our memories and all of our personality and all that, if you were to take someone's head off and put it on someone else's body, and let's say we could do that scientifically, you might argue that that person's personality would be alive and existing with the other body, and maybe have a lot of the muscle memory and whatnot and have to deal with that from the other body that they're getting, but they're still them. So that to me adds a little bit more credence to the idea that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul or the higher self, if you will. But the heart is, you know, this unifying factor between the soul and the body. Now, of course, this goes back to this question of like, well, what happens if, say, you abort a child or a baby or a fetus, rather, an embryo, far before the pineal gland or even the heart is really starting to be established? And I make this argument somewhere in this video, and I say, well, could it be less worse to abort that than later on? Like, there's still some part of the soul energy, as I mentioned, within that early stage being, but it's not as intense, it's not as potentially damaging as when more of that thing is formed. So that was kind of the idea. You know, this idea on its own kind of expands. I feel like there's so many other places that you can go with it. But I'll leave it to you to noodle on and think about how you feel and what ideas come up for you. And, you know, as always, please leave it in the comments. And with that, back to our show, which is almost over. And the most important thing, you thought I wasn't going to mention this, didn't you? But no, the most important thing out of all of this actually transcends the conversation entirely and says that we as a species need to evolve beyond this reality where this kind of thing happens. With proper education and a raising of our consciousness, first, there would be no abuse. There would be no word that starts with R and rhymes with grape. there would be none of these kinds of things that would happen, and that would reduce a lot of the trauma and a lot of the terror, and it would bring men and women together in more harmony than divide. So that's huge. We have to grow in love, in agape love especially, in universal love, and we have to understand that there is a way of using sexual energy that is beyond the carnal. Many watching you probably already know this, but maybe some of you are hearing it for the first time. Like, there is an energetic current running up the body. And if you're just having sex in a carnal way, then it's all of that energy is like rooted down here. It doesn't go up. But there is a way of channeling that sexual energy so that the orgasm is like a full body orgasm that goes around the body. And we talked about that in the Human History movie. Like, they would their sexual energy and would vibrate through their body. And it was a transcendent, euphoric, and blissful orgasm and experience for both, rather than, just explosion. This is huge. In fact, like, as a point of inspiration for this, now maybe this is going to sound super out there, but I like to believe in the mystic and the transcendent. And in Drunvalo's Flower of Life books, he describes that some of the first true mystic masters in Lemuria, which of course was the civilization pre-Atlantis, in Lemuria, there were these two souls called Ai and Tia. They became the first ascended masters in Lemuria. The way that they did this was by using their sexual energy and engaging in a very specific way with breathing practices. Not probably dissimilar from Tantra today, although I reckon they probably had a lot more psychic and spiritual connection between them. And through their intimate ceremony, by the end of it, they conceived a new child. And all three of them transformed their DNA and became immortal. What a story. And that is an example, or like a vision or a dream of what can happen when sexual energy is used right. And so I want to see a world where there is no more abuse, and where men and women have a proper sexual education that also bridges into the spiritual understanding. Like, sex education for me in grade 5 was absolutely the most useless class that I've ever attended in my life. Like, they taught us absolutely nothing. And I felt like, just growing up, I felt like I was shadowed, or I was in the dark on so many subjects for a really long time, until I started self-educating myself and having experiences and learning lessons. And I feel like that's the way that, especially with sexual energy, it's like this taboo subject. We can't talk about it. We don't talk about it much, but it's so important that we do. It's really, really, really so important. So I think that's about it. Let me see. Notes. No, I think I've covered basically everything. So in closing here, yeah, this was actually really fun. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this gave you some things to think about. And please put it in the comments if you have anything or any suggestions or any thoughts that are like, what about this? Or you missed a point, or I disagree because of this. That's great. I love reading different perspectives and views, and I do want to take it in and integrate it into my own. There might be some ways that I end up disagreeing with things that I've said here if new information comes in and challenges it. I want to be open about all of it. So the other thing that I want to say is, if this video, because I know it's super sensitive, if it triggered you or riled you and you're really mad at me, please still practice being kind in the comments if you can, or go and process what I've said and think about maybe if you might end up actually agreeing. I don't know. Next video, what should I do? More crazy things like this? Like, can a man really become a woman? Or should we just talk about, like, is the carnivore diet actually really good for you? Or maybe I'll just do something silly. I don't know. Let me know what you'd like to see, and thanks for watching.